thank you so much for joining us. This is the inaugural APIs over IPAs event for TIBCO. So I'm glad you guys are out for this. We're here at the patio in Palo Alto. It's a beautiful day. We got some covers over us because the sun's just shining so bright on us. It's fantastic. Great appetizers, great beer. So make sure you're all filled up and ready to roll. Let's see. So to get started, I want to let you know how this is going to roll. We're going to come up here. We're going to start our conversation. And if you've got questions, we will have some time at the end where we'll be able to answer those questions. And I'm glad to have them, and we'll roll from there. So again, welcome and thanks for joining us. My name is Rob Sisweta. Joining us today is Chris Lippi. He is our cloud CTO and VP.
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello.
Everyone.
And what we're drinking today on tap is the Sculpin IPA from Ballast Point down in San Diego. So if you guys have some, let's go ahead and raise a glass.
Cheers. Cheers. To the Ballast Point guy.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So for those who are unfortunately watching this at home, Sculpin IPA, delicious. It's a nice citrusy kind of floral API with a good malt backbone, so it's not all bitter and it's not all super hop forward. It's actually really, really nicely balanced. And on a day like today, you can't beat it. It's refreshing and cool, delicious. So
You sound like you know your beer.
I know my beer.
I'm just
a drinker. Wait.
Refreshing.
Refreshing.
Yeah.
It's beery.
Very nice.
It's cold and wet.
It is, and it's beer. It's good.
So, without further ado, I want to jump into it. So the reason that we have Chris up here is you came over as part of Mashery, right?
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
So did I, so everybody knows. So TIBCO bought Mashery back in September. And it's been, I'd say it's been a pretty wild ride, but it's been a hell of a lot of fun. Can you give us some insight into the process? Why Mashery, and why did they buy us now?
Oh, yeah, sure. So, I guess, so end of September. So Mashery, just by way of background, started in 2006. And I think we were the first company to market in the API management space. We actually were the ones who called it API management back in, 2007 as we were looking for our name. So we've been at this API thing for a long time, 10 years.
10 years now.
A decade. Wow.
It's really good for a tech company.
It's a long time. Yeah, so we've been at this for a really long time and had always been in this space. We actually, the product and the vision of the product from back in 2006 was pretty similar to what the product is today. More toward my mouth. All right, how's that?
You got to eat the mic.
Is my radio voice in again? All right. Yes, right. I'm glad we have beers. So anyway, so we've been at the API management thing for about a decade, and we've seen a whole lot. Every startup has to have a completion at some point, and Mashery had its completion. Our VCs were extremely happy. I don't know that the timing was anything special. I mean, it was time for TIBCO to kind of elevate and accelerate the roadmap. It's an extremely complementary product, obviously, to the pedigree of core integration products that TIBCO has. So from my perspective, being part of the deal and talking to all the suitors that were going on at that time, it's a perfect fit. It's a perfect fit for the pedigree of the company that's behind messaging-oriented middleware, integration, enterprise service buses, and so on. API management is a natural evolution and piece of all of those technologies.
So you kind of mentioned here that we were the first ones to really call it API management, because everybody else calls it a gateway, right?
Integration isn't really anything new, right? I mean, so anyone work in EDI systems? I'm old enough to EDI. Any other EDI guys? EDI guys. Anyway, so people have been hooking systems together since systems existed. Back even in kind of like drive the Wayback Machine. EDI was a function of needing to get data amongst your different business partners. EDI value-added networks. Anyone use value-added networks back in the day? That was because network challenges. APIs kind of came on, what people would call web services kind of came on the scenes in the late 90s, effectively when people were looking to move EDI transactions, like B2B transactions, onto public infrastructure. EDI vans were there, and they were extremely expensive for doing the same exact thing, just moved it to the web, right? So a bunch of different protocols. So really, what was happening, if you think about what was going on in 2000, obviously the web, the internet, there was all kinds of companies being formed at that time. In the integration space, everybody was focused at moving integration technology onto the web, right? So web services. We were doing a lot of B2B kind of transactions. At the same time, the tech industry was focused in different things, right? So if you think about Amazon launching their SOAP API to drive business partners, affiliate relationships, actually, I guess back in 99, 2000, something like that.
Right. What was it? Bezos's memo came out in what, 2000?
That was later. That was
okay.
later, 2004, 5, something. I can't remember what it was. Anyway, you had all the integration guys who were focused on B2B. What was happening in tech and online retail that's where REST was effectively kind of born. Google Maps and mashups and, fun fact, the Mashery company name is a take on mashups, obviously. Truth be told, it's winery is where you make wine, and Mashery is where you make a mashup, for any of you guys that care to know the origin story. But so what Mashery was doing at the time was we were seeing all these media companies and all these retail companies that were still doing the integration story. They were just doing kind of like at a web tier, right? It wasn't B2B transactions. It wasn't order to cash. It was brand new transaction types. It was product catalog. It was, sharing blog roles. I mean, it was all of those kind of technologies. And really, our origin story was really around media companies that were trying to do business development with other startups, with other media companies, and they were breaking each other, right? It was something where you would expose an API, you didn't put any security around it, you didn't put even any kind of simple identification, and people were dropping each other's websites and so on. So we formed a company. There was a few of the founders were working in actually a social media company. They had uncovered this because they had opened up their own API and their partners were breaking them. And CEO wasn't so happy about their website being dropped, so they shut that stuff down. The founders saw the opportunity and effectively went and started Mashery for the sole purpose of controlling the business development channel. APIs is business development 2.0, a little bit of an old term now, but that's the origin story of Mashery. So at that time, what were we doing? We were managing APIs. We were managing who could have access to it. That's why we called it API management.
Actually, this is news to me. I had no idea that we started as a social media company. It's amazing. Well, that was the progenitor.
Yeah, they were at a social media blogging company.
Oh, all right. That makes okay.
Yep.
So now they built this in 2006, and you're actually one of the original people there. So I mean, you are OG Mashery, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So like in 2006, 2007. You're building this thing out, and everybody else is saying we're going to build our servers, we're going to have a data center, we're going to have all this in-house. I mean, where I was working at the time, we had all of our data centers in-house too. Mm-hmm. You guys went cloud first SaaS with infrastructure, like the kind of thing that I would typically take an appliance and slot into my data center. Mm-hmm. What was the thinking behind that? Was it because it was cheaper because AWS?
Cheap was good. Well, so EC2 had been launched 2 months before, 2 months after Mashery formed. And it was, that looks cheap, was one part of it. But as we actually were thinking about what we wanted to do with technology, and frankly, we were focused on media and retail at the time and technology, building the ability to have a cache at the API tier, not just caching for HTML and accelerating websites, made a whole lot of sense to us. So it made actual really strong architectural technical sense to start as a web service and build this big network of compute out there. So then honestly, we got Amazon's an amazing company. Obviously, we all know what's happened to Amazon Web Services since. At that time, no one knew, right? It was Amazon East. It would fail occasionally, forced us to really understand resiliency, and in many ways, it was just luck of the draw, the timing as well. I mean, no one imagined what it was going to be.
So you're looking at this as at the time, part of it was treating it, you say it's a cache, so basically like a CDN, a content distribution network for APIs.
That's right, yeah.
Cool.
That's right. Well,
again, 2006.
We were renters as well, right? I mean, we we understood the value of SaaS. Building a company in 2006, 2007, we understood the value prop to our customers. We also understood the less we actually own ourselves, the more we can focus on the problems that we're trying to sell or solve, which is also a refrain that we use with our own customers, right? I mean, it's the same kind of thing, is that you focus on the problems that are unique to your business, and everything else someone else can do for you.
Right. Cool. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, because when I'm sitting in sales cycles, that's what we're always telling them, don't build this stuff yourself. Let us handle it. Focus on building great APIs.
That's right.
So,
yep.
Okay. So, all right. So you started with cloud first, and you can see I am reading questions on here. But when you came over to TIBCO, the title they gave you was Cloud CTO. You were general manager at Mashery.
That's right.
Now you're Cloud CTO. So first of all, what is the impact of being the Cloud CTO at TIBCO? What does that mean?
Oh, well, so TIBCO. For those of you that don't know TIBCO is a 30-year-old business and has gone through a lot of different phases of its life as well. For the most part, the cloud products are relatively new for TIBCO. So there's a team of us that are doing all the investments and managing all of the cloud technology investments that we're making, and some of it's software as a service, some of it is cloud native kinds of experience with things like BusinessWorks Container Edition and things like that work on the plumbing that app developers and integration professionals are using today, right? So building and making sure that we're building the products that make sense for those communities when they're cloud oriented.
So what are some of the challenges of taking TIBCO, which, as you say, it's a 30-plus-year-old company, mostly known for on-premise, taking it into the cloud? What are some of the challenges that we're finding there?
Wow, it's a challenge any way you look at it for any company who has a heritage in offering a product or a service in one way and learning how to actually offer it in a different way. So offer meaning sell it, service it, talk about it, and so on. From my perspective, though, TIBCO's in an amazing position where, our technology is used to run some of the world's largest companies. That's not going away anytime soon. Right. But every single one of those companies have their own cloud journey that they're talking about. Some are further along than others. And really our opportunity, and my specific opportunity, is figuring out a way to help provide the products and technologies that help in that evolution. It's not going to happen overnight for anybody.
Right.
Large companies take 5 years to do this, sometimes even longer. And I should say large companies with lots of technologists. Netflix is a great example down the road, right? So being able to offer technologies that work both on-prem, work in private clouds, work as software as a service is a huge opportunity for me personally to help build those products that make sense for our customers.
So, I mean, as part of this TIBCO, as you've mentioned, they've kind of said they're going to do cloud first and everything else. They're making a big push toward the cloud right now. Yeah. Obvious with you at the CTO helm, that means they're committed.
Right.
So why is this a big deal? What does cloud do, not just for TIBCO, but in general? What's the benefit of moving my infrastructure out of the data center and into the cloud? If
I forget to answer that question, make sure you bring me back in, or somebody in the audience do so. So, a little bit of a story. So, I think it was back in 2009, something like that. We're 100% SaaS business at the time, relatively young startup. The world's largest companies are coming to visit us, then they walk around the corner, go see Twitter, and the whole 9 yards. We were extremely cloud oriented, right? This is a software as a service kind of a technology. And we were having to evangelize, like, why is that okay? Right? Why is it okay to get this as a service rather than on-premise software? It's 2009. I think I was down in Arizona with American Express, right? Okay. So this is American Express. We don't want to show up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal with any kind of breach.
Old school financial company.
Absolutely. And I'm expecting to have the conversation about software as a service and cloud and all these things. Had it all scripted. You knew how I was going to talk about it. Was prepared to talk about on-premise. And actually, the two guys, the guys responsible for security, the guys responsible for infrastructure in 2009 said, we actually don't want to talk to you about that because we want to use you as a service. because we're trying to learn ourselves about this whole Amazon thing and what cloud computing is going to do for us in 2009. Still relatively early. If you scroll forward, so for me that was okay. So the cloud's here. That was the first sign that a financial, like a bank, American Express, was ready to start dipping their toe in the water, SaaS and cloud in general. Security guy and infrastructure guy, right? You'd never imagine. If you fast forward and you kind of come to like 2014 to now, everybody is talking about it, right? You can't go to an enterprise conversation who's not talking about, I want to run less servers in my own data centers, right? Speed, nimbleness, TCO. I mean, there's all having a hard time hiring people in order to kind of continue to run my own data center operations. Extremely hard, right? So there's not an enterprise company that's not talking about moving to the cloud, right? So kind of bringing it back to the question, that's not something you do overnight. There's no Control-C, Control-V kind of lift and shift magic. There's all kinds of technologies that are out there, that can help you with that, but there's necessarily no necessarily magic. So it's an evolution or a iteration, right? You're going to take your cloud steps one at a time. You're going to move edge systems or possibly build edge systems in the cloud to start. But you're going to eventually start to nibble away at your core. And then at some point, what everyone is talking to us about in the CIO's quarters is really about, this is a 10-year process for me to get into whether it's their own private, public cloud, straight public cloud, whatever it may be, but everybody's talking about it. So from a very personal perspective, which is where you started, it's an amazing technology problem to help go solve. And our team is extremely excited about helping with that for TIBCO, and it's an amazing opportunity for us as a company who's been solving really hard problems in running integration, BPM processes, helping with app development, real-time data, fast data. I mean, all the stories that you've heard from TIBCO for a long time. That's a really major opportunity for us, and we have to be there, right? So we're committed to doing it. It's why we've talked about cloud first. As a major initiative going on with the company is that every single product is moving itself to the cloud, either as a service or as something that looks like it's cloud native, right? So something that runs as a Docker container or as part of Pivotal Cloud Foundry or whatever the case may be, which we announced, I guess, last week. So really important for our customers, as a result, very important for TIBCO, and we're investing heavily in it.
So I'm going off script a little bit here. So when we talk about clouds and then kind of the API space, I mean, there's a lot of connection between being able to say, I've got these disparate systems, I've got the system that's still living in my data center, kind of that hybrid situation, I've got different applications. How do APIs fit in all this cloud stuff? Like, how does that does it even help make it easier? Or does it just add one more layer of complication?
I mean, so, microservices, obviously, major trend that's going on today. When you think about why people are moving stuff to the cloud, there's definitely a cost aspect, but a lot of it is about speed and nimbleness, right? So the ability to not have to think about the infrastructure, the networking, the OS layer, I mean, all of the things that we as application development professionals have had to think about forever, in many ways it just kind of exists, right? So I can focus again on solving my own business problems. All the resources I can afford to hire are focused on building those services or building the applications on top of the services, and the speed and the scalability and everything that you get from all the public infrastructure is an amazing benefit for most companies. APIs are at the center of this. So the whole microservices movement is the idea, and it's effectively just part of the journey of everything that we've talked about since 2006, which was expose APIs to make getting access to the underlying assets easier and figure out how you can actually give them to the applications that need it. Microservices is a new architectural paradigm, again, focused on APIs and effectively just saying the way that you're going to get out of your scale challenges in your application development lifecycle is by building very small, simple services, self-contained, that can scale themselves, right, without having to think of the big monolithic applications that we have for a long time. So APIs are at the center of a lot of companies' journeys of moving these things to the cloud. That said, not everybody's rewriting their applications just because they're taking advantage of public infrastructure. But for those applications that are being rewritten, or those edge systems that are systems of innovation, or whatever the pundits and the analysts will call them, a lot of those are being built with an API first kind of a strategy, microservices and so on. So that humble API, that integration thing that we've all been working on for a couple of decades, starting EDI obviously and moving all the way through the different protocols, that humble API and that integration specialist, that's kind of how people are building applications these days to survive, right? And their transformation to digital business.
So I want to dive for a second into this microservices conversation because this is one of those buzzwords that kind of drives me nuts, right? Because I feel like there's 1,000 different interpretations of what it is. We talk about microservices and how it ties to smaller individual services that serve their own web services. That the way I like to think of it is they're smaller services that are contained or constructed from even more atomic services. So those situations where I have individual resources and they need to do some kind of business logic, I move that up into a microservices, and from there I create my own web service. But then you talk to some other folks and we're talking about containerization, we're talking about virtualization and all that kind of stuff with microservices. So when you're talking about microservices, how would you define it, and how do you see it kind of transforming not just integration but the data center and the cloud and all that as well?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll give you my view on it. It's funny. I'm not the first to say it, but people actually used to talk about APIs as so done right. Now they're talking about microservices as so done right. This idea of a service orientation is also nothing new. It's the way that we went about building those things, and the focus on governance has shifted a little bit to speed. So the whole microservices movement is a relatively simple concept. It's build the smallest functional thing that you can that has no reliance on any other functional thing, because you basically are creating a service that does something really, really, really well by itself, versus what we used to do, which was build these big monolithic applications. We'd have an application server, has a database connection. You'd build all this amazing functionality, but the system over time would get more and more and more complicated. But it fit the methodologies of the time, right? You'd have a team that focused on Salesforce management. They'd build an application. So in service orientation, architecture, microservices, you have teams that own those services, and they're autonomous teams. They're people that are building very specific business functionality or whatever it may be that has no relationship to anything else that exists. But the idea being that you can scale it, in a couple of different vectors. You can scale it horizontally using public infrastructure. You can also scale it at the DB tier by sharding, right? So you've got a couple of different vectors of being able to scale those microservices. The idea being that small empowered teams as a methodology, as you build these things, your system becomes more and more and more resilient. And if you've kind of drunk this Kool-Aid, the interdependencies don't necessarily really exist like they did in a monolithic app. So how many people have worked on big monolithic apps in their career? And how many of you actually are afraid of making any changes?
You call it legacy probably too. I mean, that's how I refer to it. It's just legacy apps.
Eventually one of those big monolithic applications gets so complicated that there's 3 guys that know how it actually works. So you don't make any changes. You get paranoid about making change and change control boards. Microservice is totally different. If you blow up one microservice, one little feature might drop out of your application. So that's a fundamental shift as well. But at the end of the day, it really is a service-oriented view, right? It's the idea that you're building APIs that perform specific business function that also have the ability to scale in a couple of different dimensions, and that also give you the nimbleness to be able to react to whatever the market demands are. So you can build applications that you're going to go throw away in 6 weeks. You can build another application that's just for holiday peak period, because the services don't change. It's the application that sits on top that changes.
Okay.
Is that where you want to go on that?
That makes right sense, right? I mean, it sounds very much to me though the way that I and a lot of people in the industry have been talking about REST, right? Because when we talk about REST, what we're talking about is, having these.
And most of these are actually RESTful, right?
Right. So, well, I mean, REST is where people are, when they create the interface, they're trying to create RESTful interfaces.
Yeah.
But it's this idea of keeping them loosely coupled but tightly integrated with the other pieces in the system. Each resource is supposed to stand on its own, be responsible for its own state. When you're talking about microservices, you're kind of talking about the same idea, only
Yeah.
it feels to me like you're blowing it out a bit more and saying, well, look, it's not, they're not monoliths, but they're still responsible for this aspect of the system and nothing more and nothing less.
Absolutely right. So like if you take this forward to how you expose these APIs to partners, your employees and whatnot, you kind of come back to the API management story, right? So like you may have, if you look at kind of your architecture, you may have all of these individual small services that are orchestrated to do one task together by something that you expose to business partners. It's an API management story, right? So you've got a RESTful facade orchestrating a bunch of different activities on the back end. So same, right? I mean, and that's why I was saying that it was kind of effectively kind of a natural kind of progression of the whole API movement. Is that you're still talking about the same technologies. You're still talking about a developer orientation and speed and simplicity. You know, no longer having to file trouble tickets with IT to figure out how to get database access, but you're managing access at a different tier of your business. So all those same things kind of still apply. Same protocols in many ways. You know, the other thing that's interesting about the whole microservices movement, and you kind of alluded to it, is Docker and whatnot, right? So the whole containerization movement. So we're so lucky as technologists now that all of this stuff you effectively get for free. I mean, I'm not even just talking about open source. I'm talking about all the infrastructure as a service providers out there, right. Amazon, GCE, and so on. So you don't have to think about the OS a whole lot anymore. You don't have to think about a lot of the things that we used to have to think about back in the day. So microservices, and you will hear microservices and Docker mentioned in the same vein quite a bit, because the extremely complementary technologies is that if you can deliver these microservices inside a Docker container that you can easily scale up in public infrastructure, it kind of helps you solve that scale problem, right? You actually get a lot from the Docker community and the different tools that are out there that help you actually deploy and do that horizontal scaling if you've built these services in a correct way. None of that necessarily changes the whole API management thing, right? So you're still talking about developer tools, developer portals, easy access to understanding how...
That whole DevOps movement, where back in the day,
exactly right.
like I had to have a whole ops team that was handling the server infrastructure when I was a developer, and now I can create my own environment, and I include that as the code. So just like I have my code in Git, I've also got my Docker environment as part of Git, and it's all... I guess not Git directly, right. But yeah, now it's...
Here's my container, please run it.
Yeah, and it's all like single, like just in one instance.
Yep.
Easily replicable.
Yep.
So, all right, now I'm going back to the API talk a little bit. I don't want to call out how long you've been in the industry, but you've been with Mashery for 8 years now. So between when you started and now, what are some of the things that you've seen that have changed the most dramatically? And where are the trends, aside from the microservices conversation, what are some of the trends that you're seeing, and where do you see it going? And why should I, is it too late for me to get into it if I'm not already in?
No, I mean, I obviously drank the Kool-Aid a long time ago, right? We built a company around helping people get the API fever, effectively. So I really, in those last 8 years, I think probably the biggest change is as somebody who's spent a lot of time trying to convince people why this is so important to either mobile or just modern application development, or even where IoT will take us all. Everybody gets it. You actually don't go into even the largest IT organizations out there and they don't understand this stuff. Everyone understands it. Everyone's got some initiative around developing services in a new way, right? And thinking about what those underlying services, should they expose them to partners? Should they expose them to employees? Should they expose them to the open developer crowd? And think good things will happen if I expose my APIs. So, over the last 8 years, we spent a lot of time evangelizing. Then certain industries would get it. There's not an industry that doesn't understand this stuff now. An entire application development departments are really thinking about how they are going to retool their organization. And it is part of the cloud movement. You can't really talk about moving things into the cloud and public infrastructure without talking about APIs to some degree. So that's probably the biggest fundamental change. I think the business models come and go. If you've seen this a lot too, Rob, right? So really back in the early days, the first movers around the whole API economy story were people who wanted to expose APIs because they thought they were going to get something from free from the developer community.
Right.
So they'd expose something, and then nothing would happen, or maybe a few things happen. So the industry has changed in the business models and the value propositions of why you do these things. And it's a relatively defined space, right? It's a relatively defined, if you are this kind of a company, here's the kinds of things you should be doing. If you're only focused on internal application development, this is why APIs are important to you. If you're a data services company, this is about new sales channels, or this is about delighting your customers and so on. So those business models have changed quite a bit over time. I think from the early days back in 6 years ago, 2010, a lot of it was about external APIs. A lot of it was about getting hackathons running or
free R&D.
Getting developed. Yeah, right. That was what was being talked about that time. We were seeing this all along, is that people were looking at this as a way to build more mobile applications or get more stuff done that was already on their project list. It's just that people weren't talking about that a whole lot. The famous ones were like, we launched the Netflix API and all these cool queue managers came out. So those were the ones that got pressed, but the enterprise architects, the integration professionals were the ones that were hard at work kind of pointing their web services at places that were new for them, right? It wasn't about B2B, it was about mobile application development. And so those trends are here to stay, right? I mean, a lot of what people are doing is really about, this is just the way we build applications today. And sometimes we build them, sometimes our partners, our agencies build them, sometimes they expose them to customers, but it's just become a routine part of the application stack. And that's probably the biggest change over that period of time, is everyone's kind of figured it out. It's just a fundamental building block of any company who wants to become a digital business, which is everybody.
So, I mean, even in the early days and even now, we see a lot of these API programs that are starting from sort of the IT side of the house. Are you seeing a shift as well? I mean, obviously, coming from the strategy side of the house, we're always focused on the business value of APIs. But are you seeing that there's been a shift from that argument about like, no, it's a technology, and now it's actually, no, it's a solution for a business problem. Is that something you've noticed as well, or are we still kind of in that shift?
I think everybody gets it now, right? And so if you go back 6 or 7 years, a lot of the people who were talking about this was head of digital or chief marketing officers, actually many times because they wanted to get a mobile project out. I think the shift to IT is like, we're going to have an API program, or we're going to be building microservices, and we need a way to control access to stuff as we give it to business partners or, whatever we may be doing with it. So it used to be that a CMO would come up and say, I need to build mobile applications. The way I'm going to do that is through creation of APIs and letting my agencies have it. And then they bring in IT, and IT would say, grumble, grumble, grumble. This is our job. Send it to the EAI architect,
right?
So architect, whatever. So we used to see that a lot, and then those were always confusing conversations. Now everybody's at the table, right? Head of products at the table, all the technology guys are at the table, and it's more of like, how are we going to do this, and what technology are we going to use to make it happen? Less than about, everyone gets it, right? I was at a data services company last week. And around the table was the usual of the architectural team, but it was customer service, and it was also the head of product, right? Who was thinking about this stuff and what it would do to the ability to actually deliver more product faster, right? So, different for different companies, but everyone gets it now. I mean, that's a really big change. I mean, it's in any kind of technology, new technology space, you always go through this period where people aren't quite sure what the value is, and eventually some technologies die, other technologies become here to stay, and this is just one that's here to stay that everybody gets now, right? And it's just about, how are we going to do it?
Cool. I want to take a second. Are there any questions in the audience. Is there anybody out there with a burning question you want to ask? Put your hand up if that's true. Anyone? No
Does
one?
everyone enjoy the IPA?
This is, once again, Sculpin IPA. Very good, right? Well, then I got one more question for you when we talk about cloud. And this is where it gets interesting and tricky and weird. So I talk to a lot of companies that are wanting to go to cloud. In particular industries, I'm going to call out finance as a specific one because they've got a lot of governmental regulations. They've got a lot of privacy concerns, security concerns. And so when they look at the cloud, I mean, you mentioned Amex already. It's surprising to me that, I know in the early days of Mashery, we had Amex and Capital One Labs. Those were two that were definitely coming in and talking to us and very interested. In fact, I believe I just saw that at South by Capital One Labs released their API to the public. So, I mean, this is a big movement in terms of these older financial institutions that are really concerned about this, moving to the cloud, opening their APIs. But there's still plenty who are kind of looking at this and being concerned about security. How would you address those concerns around the security, the privacy, and making sure that they're able to keep a cap on that?
So it's a big question.
Big question.
Big question. So if you go back to 2006 when we were formed, you just rolled your own, right? I mean, it was just, there was really nothing else out there other than whatever you could actually do yourself. I think what's happened in the market in general, and security is absolutely important. There's a lot of tools and technology out there that can help you protect your brand, protect your business, make sure you don't show up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. I look at it a little bit differently, and I'll tell you why. So it's, in many ways, the way I always think about security is super important, but the role of your security people is effectively to make sure that you can do the things you need to do as a business person, right? It's not, if all you ever focus on is security of your business, you will wall yourself off and you'll shrivel into your house and you will never actually start to innovate. I think we can all agree that the pressures to become a digital business is kind of like an existential problem. Like if you don't do this, if you don't find a way to do this and move faster and be able to scale based on the needs of your business, your customers, your partners might be, you may not be in business. And there's major disruptions that are happening in the world today because everyone's so nervous about adopting new technology or whatever the case may be. So I think in 2016 we have the luxury of there's all kinds of technology. You can hear from virtual private cloud to the different software tools that are out there. And I think the security audit teams and the professionals are really getting a whole lot better about this. And it's at the end of the day, it's more of a question of, like, if you don't, what will happen? If you don't go and invest this and get
It's
at least
almost more of a risk to not do it than to do it at this point.
That's my own personal view, right? I mean, there are things that you need to protect. There are regulated industries. You have to be careful. A lot of the techniques, even for our own business. I mean, in the Mashery business, we decided that it was important to send credit card data through APIs, and that's what our customers were telling us. So we got all of our ops guys and all of our developers to go and focus on getting PCI DSS compliance, and we did so. So the vendors that are out there that are supporting you in your transformation understand this stuff, and they're doing the work that's required to make sure that they're safe as well. So the analysts, the security auditors, the tools, the technologies are all coming around to the point where you can actually build a reasonable business in cloud computing infrastructure. So I think for the most part the market is there and the enterprise IT shops are there, and it's more of just figuring out what the right technology fits are to go and take the risks that you're comfortable with, start learning about it, make sure that your people are trained, make sure you don't make common mistakes in the cloud, and so on.
Well, I think you actually just made an excellent point in regards to the staff who are trained up on this. I mean, quick Mashery plug. We are both PCI compliant, excuse me.
Yeah, payment card industry, DSS.
And high trust compliant.
High trust, SSA 16, which is the hot new SAS 70.
Right.
Words never strung together ever before as hot new SAS 70.
So, I mean, in terms of ensuring privacy and security, companies like Mashery, but also companies like Amazon, TIBCO, we're the ones who build the infrastructure. If you go back and you trace a security breach to what we're doing, it's actually potentially more harmful for us. I mean, it can kill our business.
Right.
So you've got these experts, the folks who are pretty much the best in the field monitoring these cloud services. doing the kinds of things that are focused on security, where if you were doing this and rolling it yourself, you'd have the cost of ownership for hiring those people, but also that's typically not their focus, right? I mean, they care about it, they're working on it, they're focused on it, but I mean, they're also trying to answer to the business and make sure that stuff goes live.
Yeah.
We're focused solely on making sure that stuff is secure.
Yeah, that's right. So we don't add to somebody's security audit, right? We just, here's how we do it. You give it to your auditors, the auditors say, great, and you move on.
Awesome. Thank you. Chris, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely.
Great conversation.
Thanks for having me. Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you so much.
To Ballast Point.